My fellow Americans, Thanksgiving is in a couple of days, and I hear a lot of, let's call it negativity, coming from my, I don't know if I could call it homeland, but at least the place where I once was. I hear a lot of negativity coming from Americans about the current situation in their country. And there are various reasons for that. And I think I understand, at least for the most part, I feel fairly certain that I reasonably understand the reasons why Americans are not very happy about the political situation or circumstances in their country right now. And some of these concerns that people have are probably quite justified. But since Thanksgiving is coming up, I wanted to give you folks a few things to be thankful for because I think a lot of Americans don't really understand the situation in the rest of the world. I make a lot of very long videos. Those who've been watching my channel for years know that I tend to go on for a long time. I'm going to try to keep it a little briefer this time. I mean, this is, it's going to be longer than 5 minutes, but I'm going to try to keep it, if possible, under an hour this time, which is still kind of a long time for some people. Let's see how I succeed. I don't know whether I'll actually manage to do that, but I'll try to kind of keep things a little bit on the summary level and not go too much into details this time. So let me start with the biggest, probably the biggest thing, other than the current president. Okay, the current president is obviously probably the single biggest thing that people complain about now, but I'm not too much concerned about him because he'll be gone in 3 years anyhow, assuming that he doesn't find some way to lengthen. Some people are saying that he'll find some way to lengthen his term. I'm not too concerned about that right now because I don't really consider that very likely. I think that's more speculative than anything based in fact. Let's go with the assumption that he'll be gone in 3 years from now, which seems very likely, so I'm not going to say anything further about that. That aside, the other big thing that most Americans complain about, the other big thing that Americans really say is so bad in America and it's so terrible that, terrible about being an American or living in America, is medical insurance, the health insurance situation in America. People say that in any civilized country today, there's publicly subsidized health insurance, and America is the only developed country in the world that doesn't have any such thing. Okay, that's a nice theory, but you know what? When I was living in the United States of America, I had health insurance. I got it through my work, as most Americans do. I had a job, as most Americans do, and through my job, I was able to get health insurance, which I did. I had health insurance. So this idea that Americans don't have health insurance is false, actually, because most Americans do have health insurance. They get it through their work. Now, here's where things kind of diverge a bit, because Americans or defendants of the European system would say, well, yeah, but you only get that if you work, whereas Europeans have health insurance even if they don't work. Do they? Are you sure about that? Maybe you want to fact check that idea before you believe in that idea, because as someone who has lived in more than one European country, I can tell you that you get government subsidized health insurance if you have a job. If you do not have a job, you do not get government subsidized health insurance. There's this idea that everybody in Europe just automatically gets free health insurance. No, they do not. That's not true, and I'm not sure where this idea comes from. It seems to be As far as I can tell, it's just an assumption that people make. That's why I say I think there's kind of a misunderstanding of how the situation really is. Americans just seem to assume that every person in Europe gets free healthcare. No, they don't. If you have a job, then yes, then you can join a publicly funded, government-run system or government-backed system. Which, yes, if you have a job, then yes, you can participate in that. But if you don't have a job, then no, you do not automatically get health insurance. So, in the US, when I had a job, I had health insurance, and I only had it because I had a job. In Europe, if you don't have a job, you don't get health insurance. I had health insurance in Europe because I had a job, and I got it through my job. So, what's the difference? What is the advantage to living in Europe exactly? What's the benefit that a person living in Europe would have over a person living in the United States in this regard? The one kind of difference that does exist is not all Americans with jobs have health insurance. In the U.S., you need to work some minimum number of hours per week. I want to say I don't know if it depends on the state. I have the number 30 hours per week in my head, but that might have been the one state where I was. I'm not sure if that's a federal thing or if that's a state level thing. So, okay, I apologize. I honestly don't know the facts. I know that people who work part-time, people who don't work enough hours, won't get won't get medical insurance through their job. So the one advantage that you might have as a European or someone living in Europe is that you will get health insurance no matter what kind of job you have, even if you're working a very part-time job, even if you're working only like 10 hours a week, even if you're only working 1 hour a week or 1 hour a month. If you have any kind of job, you have to be able to get health insurance through your employer, through your job. So if you work part-time, then I can understand that would be a huge benefit. That would be, okay, that's something, for people who work part-time, then yes, I understand. For those people, yes, the European system is obviously advantageous to those people because as a part-time worker, you will get health insurance in Europe, whereas in the US, you will not. But I think those people are kind of an exception. It kind of depends on how you look at it, because I know that more and more people are working part-time, but the reason for that, one of the reasons why so many people are working part-time, we hear about underemployment, that, the unemployment situation in the U.S. is not too bad. The unemployment numbers in the U.S. are actually pretty low, so it looks pretty good in that sense if you look at unemployment. But if you look at underemployment, which means people working pretty low value jobs. Like, they technically have a job, but they're working jobs which don't pay them much, or which are, kind of part-time, so they're not even working, the normal 40 hours a week, and therefore they're making even less money. One of the reasons for that is because employers deliberately hire people for low hours. If you have certain jobs, like a classic example is retail stores, people working as salespeople in a retail store. Those stores will often tend to have large rosters of employees so that they can, shuffle the employees' schedules. The idea is that no one employee should work more than like 20 hours a week, because then they're not eligible for health care. And some employees will try to get more hours, they'll try to work longer so they can then be legally entitled, like they can have a legal entitlement to health insurance. But most employers that want to avoid that situation will scrupulously avoid giving any employee more than like 20 hours a week, because then they know that person won't get health insurance because they're not eligible because they don't work enough hours per week. So it's kind of a sneaky thing that employers do. I agree it's kind of underhanded. I agree that it's not a great situation for those people. If you're a part-time worker in America, I can understand. I can understand if you work part-time, then yes, you'd probably like to have medical insurance. Your employer's probably trying to your employer's probably trying to keep you below that threshold, whatever number of, there's, again, like I say, I don't know exactly how many hours it is. There's some threshold beyond which you have to be entitled for health insurance, and if you're below the threshold, you can't get health insurance through your employer. So that is a bad situation. If you work part-time in the US, that I can understand. Then yes, the European system is better for you. But for most people who either have, pretty normal full-time jobs or no job, you don't get much advantage in Europe. In Europe, you don't get to say, I want health insurance if you don't have a job. If you don't have a job, they'll say, well, you're not paying into the system. You have to pay into the system, and the way you do that is by paying taxes through your job. If you don't have a job, what you can do is get your own medical insurance policy, but you have to pay for it yourself. And in fact, not only can you have to, because in European countries, okay, a lot of what I'm going to say will apply specifically to Germany, because Germany is the European country that I have the most experience living in. I believe other European countries have something similar. Policies and laws will vary, obviously, from one country to another, but generally speaking, the EU is kind of harmonized now. Most countries have a similar system in place. So for most EU countries, it'll be like this. You are actually legally required to have health insurance. And a lot of people misunderstand this. A lot of people think, oh, everybody has to get health insurance in Europe. That means if I go to Europe, I'll get health insurance. Well, you will have to get health insurance, but it doesn't mean that they give it to you. It means you have to get it yourself, and you have to pay for it yourself. A lot of people say in America the situation is really bad because if you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. In Europe, if you lose your job, you won't lose your health insurance. They won't cut off your health insurance because they can't, because by law you have to have health insurance, but guess what? You'll get a bill. You will get a bill for that health insurance because now you have to pay for it yourself because you're not employed anymore. So instead of getting the subsidized health insurance that you had when you had a job, congratulations, you still have health insurance. You have to pay for it out of your own pocket. So now you're unemployed, not only having to pay for the usual. I mean, being unemployed in America is bad enough because you have to pay for your rent and food while not having any income. That's terrible enough on its own. Guess what? In Europe now you also have to pay for your health insurance. And for a private self-pay health insurance policy in Europe, that's probably, unless you eat pretty expensively, that's probably going to be more expensive than your food. I did that briefly when I first came to Europe. I didn't have a job at first, so I had to pay for my own health insurance. And I was paying more for my health insurance than I was paying for food per month. So these insurance policies, they're not cheap. They are quite expensive. And if you become unemployed, or if you are unemployed, you will have to pay for that yourself by law. Otherwise, if you don't pay for it, you're in violation of the law. I mean, you can avoid paying for it, you can avoid getting a health insurance policy, but then you are guilty of a crime. It's a crime to live in Europe without a health insurance policy. And if you don't have one through your job, then you have to pay for yourself. And if you don't do that, then again, you can save the money on it, but then, if they find out, you can be charged with a crime for living in Europe without a health insurance policy. So what's your advantage? Again, because if you live in the US, you can also get your own health insurance policy. I mean, you can go to Blue Cross or some of these other people and, you can buy you can buy your own insurance policy with them and pay out of your own pocket. But in the US, you have the choice. You can choose to do that, or you can choose not to do that if you want to save the money. In Europe, you don't even have the choice. In Europe, you have to buy some medical insurance policy. You're obligated to, even if you're unemployed. If you're lucky enough to have a job, then your employer will pay a lot of it. Like a lot of it gets paid by your, it gets taken out of your paycheck, but a lot of it is paid by your employer. If you are unemployed or self-employed, then you have to pay the whole thing yourself. So again, what's the advantage? Living in Europe, people don't really have that much advantage because either they have to get a job or they have to pay for their own insurance. It's not like everybody just gets free health insurance. That idea that life works that way is a misconception. That's a falsehood that many Americans just sort of seem to get into their heads. It's not true. So again, what's the advantage of living in Europe? I mean, the system has to be paid into. That's the thing. The money for the system has to come from somewhere. where does the money for medical care come from? It has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. It doesn't just magically appear somewhere. It has to come from somewhere. They couldn't just offer it to everyone because then you just have a bunch of freeloaders who are not paying into that system but taking from it. It doesn't work, you know. Even in Europe, you know, people think that Europe somehow, with this magical socialist system that Europe has, Europe somehow controverted the laws of economics. They did not, and they cannot. Money still has to come from somewhere. So, you Americans who think that you have it bad with health insurance and that Europeans are much better off, it's not really that way, honestly. But that's only the start. Let me tell you what happens after you get health insurance. I'm just going to cycle my camera, and I will, just to save this segment as a separate video file, and then I'll get started on the next portion in just a moment. Okay, so I've talked about the process of getting health insurance. Let's suppose now that you have health insurance. Let's imagine, whether you live in the US or you live in Europe, let's imagine that you have a health insurance policy now. However you got it, whether you paid for it yourself or got it through your work or through a family member, that can also happen if you're married to someone who has health insurance. They can often insure you as a family member. But okay, let's assume that you have health insurance now. What happens when you go to a doctor? When I was living in the U.S., I could see a doctor in a couple of days. If I wanted to talk to the doctor about anything, any kind of medical issue, I could make an appointment with my local doctor, and there would probably be an appointment available in like a couple of days. Maybe if I had to wait longer, like a week. Like a week was considered a long waiting time. How do you think waiting times are for doctors in Europe? If you are at all familiar with the NHS, which stands for National Health Service, which is it's the health service of the United Kingdom, the UK, England, plus England, plus Wales, plus Scotland, plus North Ireland. If you're at all familiar with the situation with the NHS, you've probably heard that people have to wait months to see a doctor. Now, I don't want to get onto a big, long political rant about communism versus capitalism. That's a whole other subject. I don't want to get into that now because that's something that could easily take up more than an hour on its own. But in general, if you try to open something up to make it more accessible to people in whatever way, that will have the drawback that there will be more people using that facility or that service, which is great if you run a paid-for service. I mean, if you run a business, generally speaking, the more customers you have, the better. Most businesses want more customers. But if you're running some kind of government service, some kind of government-subsidized service, that creates the problem now that you have longer waiting times. And so the whole European system of, giving everyone health insurance, and, I mean, again, not everyone has health insurance. Most people in Europe have health insurance either through their job or through their family or by paying it themselves. And again, if you don't have health insurance, then that's illegal. So let's assume that most people in Europe have health insurance one way or another. But this system of ensuring that everyone has health insurance has the drawback now that you're creating longer waiting times. I mean, the waiting times in the UK are insane. I've never lived in the UK, so I can't speak of this from firsthand experience, but I've spoken to people who live in the UK or who have been there. Everything that I've heard says that the system there is quite broken. I don't have a lot of details about that country specifically. You could ask someone from England or from the UK. They could probably tell you more than I could. But that's the basic idea. If you have a system like this where health insurance is made more available to people, then a necessary sort of drawback and consequence of that is that waiting times are going to be sometimes insanely long. Which means that if you need urgent care, you might have to wait a long time for that urgent care. As I told you, I know more about Germany because I lived longer in Germany, so I have some experience dealing with the system in Germany. So what I can tell you in Germany is that the system in Germany is, if anything, it's even worse. In Germany, waiting times aren't too long. Waiting times are usually pretty reasonable for most. If you just want to talk to your doctor, usually the waiting times are pretty reasonable. How do you think they keep the waiting times reasonable? They keep the waiting times reasonable by capping how many patients they have. Each doctor in Germany has some limit to how many patients they can have on the, and I'm not talking about like per day. I don't mean like how many appointments they can make in one single day. I'm just talking about patients, period. Because once you go to a doctor, and if the doctor accepts you as a patient, then you're on their patient list. They have some patient roster or list internally with a list of all the patients that are assigned to that doctor. And that list has some, I believe it's set at some federal limit. I don't know exactly how the law works, but as I understand it, there's actually some federal limit to how many patients can be assigned to one doctor. So if the doctor, reaches that limit, if they have, the maximum number of patients that one doctor is allowed to have, then they just won't take any more patients. Guess what that means if you go to a doctor in Germany? If you go to any doctor in Germany, they will tell you, well, the first thing they'll say, like if you go to a doctor's office and talk to the receptionist, the very first thing they'll say is they'll ask you, have you been a patient with us before? Because if yes, then you're on their list, you're on their patient list, and then they can take you. But they'll ask you, have you been a patient with us before? And if the answer is no, then they'll immediately say, we're not taking new patients. And this is the case everywhere in Germany. And another lovely thing, by the way, I'm going to back up a bit and talk about something else. Some kind of wonderful system that they have in Germany, which I don't know how this is in other European countries, but I'll tell you how it works in Germany. In Germany, you cannot go to you cannot even go to a hospital if you're sick or if you need some kind of medical care. They literally won't let you go to a hospital until you go to what's called a Hausarzt. Now, Arzt is the German word for a doctor, physician, and Haus is house. So like Hausarzt can literally be translated as house doctor. What a Hausarzt is, it's basically, what you'd call a GP in English. It's basically, a general doctor who just kind of handles kind of the first line of doctor that kind of sees patients at first before referring the patients to some specialist. So it's like if you have some problem with your, let's say with your heart, then you need to go to a cardiologist. But you cannot go to a cardiologist directly. You have to get a referral to the cardiologist from a Hausarzt. Now that in itself might not be so bad. That would just be one more step of bureaucracy. But okay, Europe is full of bureaucracy, as we all know, right? So it wouldn't be so bad if you go to the Hausarzt, say I need to see a cardiologist. Okay, cool. The Hausarzt gives you a referral, and then you go with the referral to the cardiologist and talk to the cardiologist. That in itself would be okay. But the Hausarzt, like I said, will first ask you if you've been a patient with us before, or not the doctor themselves, but their receptionist. The person receiving patients at the front desk will ask you if you've been a patient with us before. If you've not been a patient with them before, they'll probably turn you away. And this problem is everywhere. I used to live in the middle of Berlin, which is the biggest city in Germany. And when I had a medical issue, I went to every doctor around, where I lived and where I worked, and I asked every doctor I could find if I could make an appointment with them. They all said the same thing. First they asked, have you been a patient with us? When the answer was no, then they said, we're not taking new patients, sorry. And later I lived in a small town in Germany, and in this small town, smaller sort of, not quite a village, it was a little larger than a village, but, small enough city that, it wasn't really, not a big city. I went to every doctor in the city, and they all said the same thing, we're not taking new patients. I could not get a doctor where I lived. They were all full. They wouldn't take a patient. So it wasn't even like the NHS in the UK where, you have to wait 3 months to see a doctor. That would be bad enough. Waiting 3 months to see a doctor would be, that's pretty egregious in itself, perhaps. But in Germany, they just say, no, we won't take you. We're not taking more patients. And again, this is not like, come back tomorrow, maybe we'll have a slot tomorrow. No, this is not just like a per day thing. This is like, we're not taking new patients, period, ever. We have too many. We have enough patients. We're at the limit of patients on our patient roster. We will not take any more patients, period. Sorry, try somewhere else. I went to every doctor in that town where I lived. None of them were taking new patients. I could not go to see a doctor. And this is something that people might find hard to understand, because people are like, what do you mean you can't go see a doctor? Like, it sounds almost ridiculous. It sounds absurd on the surface to say you literally can't go see a doctor. Doctors will not take patients. I'm not lying to you. I'm not making this up. You literally, if you live in Germany, you cannot go to a doctor. Well, you can go to the doctor. You can go to the doctor's office, but they'll say we won't take you as a patient. And even if you know that you need a referral, like if you have a heart problem, for example, I'm saying this partly of my own experience because I have heart problems. If you know that you have a heart problem, you know that you need to go to a specialist, to a cardiologist. But even if you just ask them, can I please just get a referral? Can I please just get a referral to a cardiologist? I don't need anything else. They'll say, no. If we do that, then you're already a patient with us. Because if we give you a referral, that means that you are our patient. We're not taking new patients. That's it. Sorry, we won't even give you a referral. That's it. Done. Sorry, go somewhere else. You cannot see a doctor in Germany unless you're lucky enough to be one of those people who finds. So you might ask, well, how do people go to doctors then? Well, a lot of them don't. A lot of people spend literally years in Germany looking for a Hausarzt, and they don't get one. They don't find one. They spend years literally without a doctor. I had in one place, they told me, we have a new doctor starting here. This doctor is just graduating from medical school, and in like 6 months, they'll be starting here. We can put you down for an interview. So we can like plan an interview. We can make an appointment for an interview in 6 months to see if this doctor will take you, this new doctor who's just graduated from med school will take you as a patient. It's like a job interview. It's literally like a job interview. You have to apply for an interview and see if the doctor will take you. And I would have had to wait 6 months for that appointment. And I said no, because I was moving. I was actually moving out of that place where I lived, so it wouldn't have been local to me in 6 months anyhow. But that's literally the situation how it is. And you might not believe me. It might sound insane the way I'm describing it, but I'm not exaggerating. This is literally how it is in Germany. And I believe it's probably similar in other European countries. Either you have to wait ridiculously long, or they just cap the number of patients. And then once you try to go beyond that, they'll say, we're not taking more patients. Now, there was one doctor's office that told me something a little bit different. I went there, explained my situation to them because I had, I had an urgent medical issue that needed urgent assistance, urgent attention, and they asked me, "Can I see your insurance card?" I gave them my health insurance card because I had health insurance, so I had a publicly, the usual publicly funded health insurance card that you get. You get a little plastic card showing that you have health insurance. So I gave the receptionist my card, and she said, "We're not taking patients with public health insurance plans. But if you want to pay for it yourself, I can make an appointment for you tomorrow." Some doctors will not accept people who have the government-funded, publicly subsidized health insurance because it's not as lucrative for them. They're not required to accept it. The doctor can't, at their option, just say, I'll only take self-payers. I'll only take patients who pay out of their own pocket because they know they can charge those people more money. I don't know how the law works, but there's obviously some cap on how much doctors can charge you through the public health insurance plans. Like, they can't charge you some ridiculous fee. because the insurer would put a stop to it. But if you pay out of your own pocket, the doctor can obviously charge whatever they want. And a lot of doctors do this. They don't take people with insurance plans at all. They'll take you if you pay for it yourself, and they'll charge you some ridiculous fee because they know that because they know that they have you that way. They know that if you need urgent medical attention, then obviously you're probably willing to pay for it, and that's how they get you. So the only doctors that will readily take patients are doctors who, generally speaking, are doctors who do this. Doctors who will say, like, yeah, if you want to self-pay, if you want to pay out of your own pocket, then I'll make an appointment for you, but not if you're coming from a public health insurance plan, because we already have enough of those patients. I was lucky in one situation where I lived. I found one doctor who took me, and I later did a little bit of research on him. There are places where you can rate doctors and see other people's reviews on them. And when I looked up this doctor, I found a review from some woman who wrote, "The doctor refused me as a patient because I'm a woman, and he informed me that in the past he had been charged with sexual harassment against a female patient, and because of that issue, he was, as a matter of policy, no longer accepting female patients." Now, I don't know how legal that policy is. I have the feeling that categorically saying that we won't take female patients could probably be considered sexual discrimination that could probably get challenged in court. But allegedly that's what the doctor told. I mean, I'm only going off by what this person wrote. I mean, who knows whether it's true, but from what I saw of the doctor, I could believe it. He seemed like a bit of a... Well, I don't want to say too much about him, but I will say I saw only men in his waiting room. When I was waiting in the doctor's waiting room, I actually can confirm I saw only men there. There were no women there, which is a little suspect. But yeah, this person said, the doctor told me flat out, he had been charged with sexual harassment in the past, and so as a consequence of that, he was no longer taking women. That probably explains why he had room for me. I mean, women are about half the population, so if you exclude half the population that way, then maybe for that reason you'll have, if you find a doctor like that, maybe that doctor will take you as a patient. If you're lucky enough to find a doctor like that, then maybe the doctor will take you. But a normal doctor, like a regular doctor who would, let's say an average doctor, will just tell you right away, or again, not the doctor, but the receptionist, they'll tell you right away, we're not taking new patients. Full stop. That's it. It sounds insane, but that's how it is. So let me ask you, because Americans always just think about health insurance. They always just think about how much medical care costs. They always say, well, if I need some kind of medical care in the U.S., it's going to cost me thousands of dollars. Sure, yeah, it will. And I understand that's why people want to have medical insurance. But ask yourself this question. What good is having medical insurance if doctors won't take you? What is the point of having medical insurance if doctors will not accept you as a patient? What good is having that little plastic card? Like, some people get that, people get that little plastic card and they say, woohoo, finally I have health insurance, now I can go to the doctor. Yeah, you can go to the doctor with that card. What good is it if they won't take you, if they turn you away and say, we're not taking patients? That's what it's like to go to a doctor in Europe. And again, I'm not joking, I'm not exaggerating this at all. This is what happened to me, and I've heard this from other people as well. Other people have told me, yeah, they had to go years without a doctor. They had to go years without medical care. The only medical care that you can get is emergency care. If you have an emergency, if you're in a car accident, or if you have a heart attack or something like that, okay, you can call 112, which is the European equivalent of 911. You can call 112, and yeah, an ambulance will come and take you to the hospital. In that situation, yes, you can get emergency medical care, and you can show them your health insurance card, and they'll take it. In that situation, yes. But for non-emergency situations, you cannot get to see a doctor. It doesn't happen. They'll just turn you away. They'll say, no, we have too many patients already. We're not taking new patients. So your only choice, if you have any kind of medical issue, is to wait until it becomes an emergency. I mean, the reason why people go to doctors in a non-emergency capacity is to get things treated and looked at, prevention. They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's better to attend to medical issues before they become emergencies. Well, in Europe, usually your only option is to wait until it becomes an emergency, and then you can get medical care for it, but not before that. It's not a good system. Once you've seen how it works in Europe, I don't, honestly, the medical care that I got in the US was better. I mean, when you finally get to see a doctor, once you finally actually have an appointment with the doctor, and once you're actually there in the hospital or wherever, the quality of the medical care itself is about similar. It's kind of on par. The actual level of medical technology and expertise that people have is similar. Like in the US and in Europe, it's not much different. It's similar. So I wouldn't say you have much advantage one way or the other. But in the US, I had better medical care in the sense that I could go to a doctor and make an appointment with the doctor for some non-emergency thing. So I had better medical care in the US, to be honest. Okay, so I've talked, I think, enough for now about the subject of medical care and medical insurance in Europe. Let's move on to another big expense, probably the biggest expense for most people, is housing. Now, housing in Europe tends to be more affordable than in the U.S. Americans talk about housing prices and, how insane housing prices are. And they are pretty insane, I have to say. Looking at the housing prices in America, it's pretty... it is pretty egregious. In Europe, housing prices tend to be more affordable because in most places there is a rental ceiling, which again, it's some legally set limit on how expensive an apartment can be, and so landlords can't just charge whatever price they want. They have to charge some legally permissible rental rate for an apartment, and so that does help make apartments more affordable. Although even with that, some apartments are still quite expensive. Some people still have trouble affording housing. But let's say that housing in Europe is more affordable than in America. I think in most cases that would be true to say. By analogy, compared to what happened with the health insurance, with the medical care thing, like I said, we talk about what happens in the UK, how you have to wait months to see a doctor. What do you think happens in Europe when you make housing affordable? There's no housing. If you look for an apartment, even a simple apartment in most of Europe, maybe not in smaller cities, like very small cities where there's nothing there, but I mean, if it's a very small city, then people don't want to live there because there are no jobs. But if it's anywhere in or around any kind of sizable city, then there are just no apartments because apartments are affordable. And so all apartments will be taken because, since people can afford them, people will take them. In many German cities, if you go to see an apartment, like if you look at the apartments that are available and you go to have a sighting of an apartment to apply for an apartment that's available, there will be like 50 other people there applying for the apartment. What do you think are your chances of getting the apartment? Many people have had to wait months. Again, people have had to wait months and months applying to different apartments and getting denied, not because there's anything wrong with them. I mean, these are, obviously you'll have a hard time getting an apartment if you have no income. There's the usual thing, you have to show that you have a job, you have to show that you have an income so you can afford the apartment. That's the usual thing. It's the same in the US. The same thing happens in Europe. But even if you have a job, even if you can afford the apartment, they'll probably turn you down just because they had 50 other people who applied for the apartment. And so again, for that reason, many people who move in Europe either have to stay with friends or stay in a hotel or something like that, for months and months because there's nothing else available. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the thing is, in many places there is low-cost housing available for people with especially low incomes, but you have to get certified. Like, you have to actually go to some government bureau, department, whatever, and get a certificate saying that you're certified low income, that you're actually certified. You need to actually get certified as living below the poverty line. So you need to get a certificate saying that you're officially living in poverty. And then with that, you can go apply for these special low-cost apartments. That means that the cheapest apartments actually just remain available. They just remain uninhabited because only super low-income people can rent them. So you have this sort of artificially created gap in the housing market where, like, you have these apartments which are small and cheap, but most people can't rent them because only people who are certified low income can rent them. Like, only people who are actually certifiably poor can rent those apartments. So that's another sort of, again, it goes back to the kind of whole communism thing where communism sort of naturally leads to shortages. When you try to make things more accessible to people, I'm not saying that housing should be super expensive. I mean, I am horrified by apartments, seeing apartments in New York City, which cost like $4,000 a month for like a simple studio apartment, something like that. It is outrageous. Obviously, the prices are outrageous that you see there. But, you have the choice between either something like that or a situation where there just are no apartments because all the apartments are taken, because since they're affordable, everybody can afford one, everybody does afford one, everybody lives in one, so there are no apartments now. So, that's kind of like, again, I'm not trying to turn this into a political statement, but when you make things available to people, that is going to create a lack of supply. It's going to create scarcity. And I'm not advocating here for making things really expensive. I'm not trying to advocate for capitalism here. I'm not saying that you should make housing more expensive. I'm just saying that if you do make it more affordable, if you do make it more accessible, then expect it to be gone. Expect it to not be available because there's always going to be somebody who's going to take it. There's always going to be somebody who will take whatever is on offer. So, there's that. I mean, do you want to live in a place where apartments are hideously expensive, or is it better to live in a place where there just are no apartments available because they're all full already? Everybody's already got one, and if somebody moves and their old apartment becomes available, then you've got 50 people applying for an apartment, and you're probably not going to get one because there are so many other people applying. What system is better? I don't see that there's a good solution there, honestly. So yeah, not a good situation in either case. Other stuff that people like about Europe, what are other things that Americans always say is cool about Europe? Public transit. I mean, yeah, public transit in Europe tends to be pretty good for the most part, but it's not that much different from American public transit. I mean, take a New York City subway train, or take a BART train in San Francisco or the San Francisco Bay Area. It's not much different from taking the London Underground or the Paris Metro or the Berlin U-Bahn. It's all kind of the same idea. I mean, yeah, public transit is nice, but it's only available in major city centers. It's just like in the U.S. In the U.S., you also have public transit in New York, in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in Houston, in Seattle, I could go on. You also have public transit. You also have public transit in big cities. And in Europe, it's the same thing. You'll have public transit in big cities. If you're in a smaller town, then public transit will probably be lacking there because there's no money to pay for a comprehensive public transit system in a small town of only a few thousand people. It makes no difference whether you live in America or in Europe, it's the same principle. Again, the money has to come from somewhere. The money to pay for buses and trains has to come from somewhere. And if there are not many people living there, then you won't have a good public transit system there, whether you're in America or somewhere in Europe. So there's that. And stuff like, a lot of people who go to Europe seem to say, they get this idea that there's more diversity in Europe, which I don't quite get because, no, there's not really that much diversity in Europe. I mean, there's diversity in the sense that the different European countries are different from each other. So it's like, if you like different languages, like some people like the whole language thing. People say that it's cool to hear different languages. So yeah, if you go to Italy, you'll hear people speaking Italian. If you go to France, you'll hear people speaking French. If you go to Poland, you'll hear people speaking Polish. Yeah, sure, that's cool. But each country has its own language. So it's not like the US where it's a melting pot. You don't really have these, well, you do. Today in some European countries, you do. A lot of European cities now are becoming very diverse, but most of the people moving there are not Europeans. They're people moving from, other places. So like if you go to the middle of Paris or London or something, you're not going to hear a lot of European languages. You're going to hear a lot of Indian languages or people speaking in Arabic or something like that, which is like, okay, you can get the same thing in New York. Or, again, the usual list of big American cities. I mean, there's diversity there as well. There's the same thing. There's different ethnicities and different languages mixing together. And this idea that Europeans are all very multilingual, it's not really true. It's true that language teaching is more emphasized in schools in Europe, but once people get out of schools, they stop learning languages. So it's like it's something sort of compulsory. There's this perfunctory sort of effort to learn languages in European schools, but once people become adults, they just forget about it. So, like, people believe that every European speaks 3 languages. That's not true. If you look at statistics, about half, like almost half of all Europeans are monolingual. They just speak their native language. They just speak the language of whatever country they live in. And the vast majority of Europeans who are bilingual just speak that language plus English. So they speak whatever language is their local country's language, plus they speak English. That's it. This idea that Europeans are all very, very multicultural and multilingual, it's not really true. Even in countries where, there is more than one national language, like a good example is Switzerland. Switzerland is, it has a German-speaking portion and a French-speaking portion. It also has an Italian-speaking portion. And they have a 4th national language, which I think is called Romansh or something like that, which is not very widely used. But so theoretically, people who live in Switzerland should speak at least German and French, and maybe Italian as well. But I can tell you it's not that way. If you go to the German-speaking part of Switzerland, people there will speak German and English. They don't speak French very well. If you go to the French-speaking part, people there will speak French and English. They don't speak German very well, or Italian, most of them. I mean, there are exceptions. There are some people who will, but most people just speak their local language plus English. It was the same in, Belgium is another example. So Belgium has a Dutch-speaking part and a French-speaking part. Theoretically, people in Belgium should speak both languages. They don't. Most people in the Dutch-speaking part just speak Dutch and English. Most people in the French-speaking part just speak French. A lot of them don't even speak English. I was in Brussels, and Brussels is supposed to be a bilingual city. It's supposed to be Dutch-French. And you'd hope that in Brussels, which is, also where the European Union headquarters are, it's not officially the capital city of the European Union. The European Union doesn't officially have a capital city, but if it had one, it would be Brussels, because Brussels is where the European Commission has their headquarters. You'd think and hope in a city like that people would speak English. I can tell you they don't. I've been to Brussels, and even in restaurants and cafes, people do not speak English. They speak only French. So this idea that that Europe's really diverse and has so many different kinds of people mixed together, it's not true. It's not true. There are some people like that. But I've also met Americans who speak multiple languages. I've met lots of Americans who speak, of course, Spanish is the most popular language in the U.S., most popular non-English language in the U.S. But I've also met Americans who speak German or French or Italian or something else. It's not uncommon to meet Americans who are multilingual as well. So this idea that all of Europe is so diverse and it's so it's not true. Sorry, but it's just not the case. Okay, so I guess I should start wrapping up here. So I guess the other thing that I should talk about is culture. Is there at least a different culture in Europe? Is the mentality different? There's a different mentality for sure. I mean, the way that people think in Europe is different from how Americans think, but it's also kind of a country to country kind of thing. Definitely the mentality in, let's say, Poland is different from the mentality in France. The thinking in Greece is very different from the thinking in Denmark, for example. There's a different sort of approach. And overall, I can say, if you like European things, like if you like this idea of, I don't know, art, for example, like a lot of people like art, they like classical painting or classical music, and they think that if I move to Europe, then I'm going to hear, classical music being played everywhere. It's really not the case. Classical music is mostly something for old people these days. Most people in Europe these days just want to listen to Taylor Swift and Drake, just like everyone else. They're obsessed with American pop music. They watch the same shows on Netflix that you watch as Americans on Netflix. They use iPhones and Android phones and all the same apps and whatever that people, they use WhatsApp and Snapchat and Facebook and whatever else. It's the same. The culture is, these sort of cultural touchstones are the same in Europe as they are in the U.S. So I just don't see that there's a lot of difference there. And this idea that Europeans are so much more cultured than Americans, that Americans are just stupid, sort of uncultured buffoons, and Europeans are so well-read and so educated and so refined. I don't really find that to be the case. There are some Europeans who are very well educated and refined, but there are some Americans who are that way as well. And my general experience has been that most Europeans are just people who want to watch television and party with friends just like everyone else, just like everywhere else in the world. So it's not like Europe is some kind of oasis of high culture that people imagine it to be. At least that hasn't been my experience, and I've been all over Europe. So, again, there are people in places that belong to high culture, but there are Americans who do as well. You can also find sort of high-class societies in the United States. There are people in the United States who are very well-educated and very well-spoken and very well-read. So, again, if you're looking for that thing, you can find it anywhere, but everywhere you go, it's kind of a minority. It's kind of a niche thing. Most people, like I said, just want to party. They just want to have fun and watch TV. So, in the end, Europe runs on money, just like anywhere else. Just like I was saying, money for whatever you want, money has to come from somewhere. You need a job. You have to make yourself economically useful somehow. So you need a job or some other kind of source of income, just as in the U.S., just as anywhere else in the world. And if you don't have one, then you'll be homeless, just like in the U.S. There is homelessness in Europe as well. People sleeping on the streets. I've seen it all over Europe, from England to Greece and everywhere in between. So it's not like poverty and homelessness don't exist in Europe. It's not true. So a lot of people might ask me, do I regret living in Europe? I would say no, I don't regret it. It was certainly in some ways an interesting experience. I think that probably maybe I learned something from it. But I will say, I don't know that I might not have moved to Europe if I had known how it would be, like if I'd known how it would go for me. Because honestly, after spending time in Europe, I'm not sure that I really have much advantage in Europe. Again, like I said, what's the advantage of living in Europe? I don't really see that there is one. For certain people in certain situations, there might be. Certainly, if you need, like I said, people who work part-time but still want health insurance, okay, that's a case where you can say, yeah, that's something you would have in Europe that you don't have in the U.S. People who people who really want to live without a car might find it easier to do so in the U.S. In Europe, but I lived in the U.S. without a car for a while. Like I actually lived in California without a car for more than a year, and I got along fine. I took public transit, and yeah, it's less convenient. Sure, it's less convenient than having a car, but there are lots of advantages. Kind of depends on your lifestyle and what you want to do and where you want to go, how often you want to go to different places. So yeah, I wouldn't say that living in Europe was a horrible experience for me. I wouldn't say that I terribly regret living in Europe for a while, but like I said, I don't know that I would have gone there if I'd known how it would have been for me, because I just don't really see that I have much advantage, or that people in Europe have much advantage from living there. So what I want to say to people who are thinking about, sort of have this envious sort of idea that, it would be so much better if I could move to some other country. What I want to say to those people is, don't expect that moving to another country is going to magically solve all your problems, because it won't. You'll have the same problems wherever you go, because that's just how the world works. Certainly, if you think that your life might be significantly better in another country, then you can try going there. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go there, but what I am saying is, this whole grass is greener effect, this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, is very strong. And people make sort of unwarranted assumptions about life in other countries that often are just not true, or at least are exaggerated. So, I myself am thinking of of moving to another country again. Whether I'll do that, I don't know. That still remains to be seen. But and people people always ask me, "Are you thinking of going back to the U.S.?" Well, the literal answer is yes. I've thought about it. I'm not necessarily against doing so. But at the present time, I think the situation in the U.S. is not necessarily the best. And I'm not talking about Trump. I really don't care about Trump, because like I said, Trump will be gone in another few years. I don't really care much about Trump. Trump is, for me, a symptom of the problem. He's not really the problem. He's a symptom of the problem. It's more the circumstances that led to Trump getting elected. That's the problem, because if Trump can get elected, then someone else like him can get elected. So that's kind of the problem. It's this whole set of circumstances that led to the political event of him being elected in the first place. I'm not even that much against Trump. I mean, I don't like how he speaks. I don't like his whole attitude, how he presents himself. But as a politician, I don't even consider him that bad. Like, he's done some things which are questionable, but it's not about that. It's not about who's the president. I don't really care who's the president, because in most cases, the president or prime minister or chancellor or whatever of a country is more of a figurehead. They're more of a face than somebody who really decides how your day-to-day life works. I mean, to me, it doesn't make much difference who the head of state or head of government for my country is. That doesn't directly influence my everyday life very much. Maybe in some small ways it does, but not really that much. So it's not about Trump. It's just more about the overall situation, the overall sort of economic and social and political and cultural situation in the U.S. is not really... it's not where I really see myself belonging right now at this stage of my life, or at this stage of human history. But it's not to do with that guy in the White House. That's not really my problem. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to go, or what I'm going to do when I go there, or if I'm going to move. I mean, I may just stay where I am now, although I probably won't, but that's another story. I just want to kind of let people know that wherever you go, you're going to have probably similar problems to what you have now. Yeah, there are different systems, there are different cultures, different attitudes in different places around the world. And like I said, if you really think that your life is going to be improved by moving somewhere else, then okay, you may think about emigrating to another country, but don't buy into the hype. Don't believe that everything is going to be so much better than it is, because it probably won't be as good as you imagine it to be. And honestly, if you are an American living in America right now, I still believe that you're living in a great country. Honestly, I say this as someone who left. I realize that I am someone who left the country, but still, I have always loved the United States. I always will. It always will have a special place in my heart, and I really do think that it is still a great country with a lot of potential. And I wouldn't. I may sound like a hypocrite because I'm not there now, but I honestly would not feel ashamed of my country if I still lived there. But that's just my perspective and my opinion. If you want to leave, then leave, but just don't buy into unrealistic fantasies that just aren't true, because you'll probably just be disappointed and find that things weren't really as you expected. So that's all that I really wanted to say. So in this spirit, happy Thanksgiving to all my American viewers and friends. Take care of yourselves. Adios.